Well, it's December already, and even with all the holiday cheer, it seems like we can't escape the political drama.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, our deep dive takes us right into the heart of it, over in France. We're taking a close look at this BBC article titled, "Months of Political Instability Loom as French Government Nears Collapse."
Yeah.
And from the sounds of it, things are pretty tense over there.
It's a very serious situation for sure, a major political crisis, actually. And there aren't any easy answers in sight.
So let's unpack this a bit.
Okay.
This article really paints a picture of a government on the verge of collapse, starting with Prime Minister Barnier, who is facing a no-confidence vote that he's almost certain to lose.
Yes, that's right.
So how did things get to this point? What's the backstory here?
Well, to understand that, we need to look at the type of government Barnier has been leading, a minority government.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Essentially, his party doesn't have enough seats in the National Assembly, which is France's parliament, to pass legislation on their own. So he's been reliant on the cooperation of his political opponents to get anything done.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult.
Oh, it is incredibly tricky, like trying to build a house of cards in a windstorm.
And I'm guessing this budget baddie was the big gust of wind that toppled everything.
Exactly. Barnier put forward a budget aimed at reducing the deficit, something that, by the way, the EU has been encouraging France to do for a while now.
Right.
But because of his minority position, he was really vulnerable to opposition amendments, which ended up significantly changing the budget proposal.
So it turned into a tug of war and the rope snapped.
You got it. The budget became this battleground with everyone pulling in different directions, and ultimately it led to this complete impasse.
Now, even after Barnier tried to compromise, it seems like it still wasn't enough. The article specifically points to Marine Le Pen and her party as key players in pushing for his downfall.
Yeah, they played a pivotal role in all of this.
So for those of us who might not be as familiar with French politics, who is she and why is she so influential in this situation?
Marine Le Pen is the leader of the National Rally, which is a populist right-wing party, and in this very fragmented parliament, they hold a significant amount of power.
Okay, so even though they aren't the majority party, they have enough votes to make a real difference.
Precisely. They have enough votes to tip the scales, and in this case, they've chosen to side against Barnier.
So we have a prime minister on his way out,
Mm-hmm.
a budget in limbo, and a political system that appears to be completely gridlocked.
Yes, that's a pretty accurate summary of where things stand.
This chaos scenario that Barnier and his supporters have warned about, what are the potential consequences of all of this? I mean, what could it actually mean for France and for everyday people?
Well, imagine you're planning a vacation, but you have absolutely no idea how much money you have or if you'll even be able to get the time off work.
That's a stressful thought.
Right. And that's kind of what it's like right now for businesses and investors in France. They're facing a ton of uncertainty because of this political instability. And what this can lead to is instability in financial markets, which often translates to higher borrowing costs.
You mean for the government?
Well, for the government, but also potentially for individuals, people taking out loans could be affected. And it also might force the government to implement some pretty drastic spending cuts down the line.
So essentially, all of this political drama could have a real impact on the lives of everyday French citizens.
Absolutely. This isn't just some abstract political game. It has very real-world consequences.
Now, the article also mentions that even if the government technically collapses, it doesn't necessarily mean that France will come to a grinding halt. They have some, constitutional workarounds, right?
That's right. It's not like France will descend into chaos overnight. Their constitution actually has mechanisms in place to keep things running, at least for a while.
So what do those look like?
Well, they can extend the current 2024 budget, and then if they can actually form a new government, that government can introduce something called a corrective budget later on.
A corrective budget, so kind of like a patch until they can get a proper budget sorted out.
Exactly. It's a way to keep things functioning until a more permanent solution can be found.
Okay, that makes sense. But even with these temporary measures, this whole situation, as this article highlights, seems pretty dire. It's not just about this budget battle, though, right? This seems to point to something much deeper going on.
Oh, absolutely. You're spot on. This crisis has exposed some very serious cracks in the French political system. It's like a fault line that's been rumbling for a while, and this budget battle was the earthquake that brought everything to the surface. Yeah, it's like we're seeing the foundations of their political system starting to crumble.
So let's go back a bit. The article mentions President Macron dissolving parliament earlier this year. What exactly does that mean, and why did he do it? It almost seems like that move backfired.
Well, dissolving parliament is like hitting the reset button. It's a pretty drastic measure.
Right.
And Macron did this back in June after his party failed to secure a majority in the parliamentary elections. Basically, it was a gamble. He was hoping that by holding new elections, he could gain a stronger mandate.
So he was trying to consolidate his power.
Exactly. He was hoping to gain more control over the National Assembly.
But instead, he ended up with a parliament that's even more fragmented and difficult to manage.
It was a huge miscalculation. The new elections actually resulted in a parliament where no single party had a clear majority. So it's like this giant jigsaw puzzle where none of the pieces fit together.
Wow, that's a great analogy. So how do you even begin to form a stable government in a situation like that?
It's incredibly difficult. To form a government, you need a coalition of parties to agree on things, but that's almost impossible when everyone has different agendas and priorities. It's like herding cats.
This whole situation seems to highlight just how divided French society is right now.
Oh, absolutely. There are the traditional left and right-wing parties, but then you also have these rising populist movements like Le Pen's National Rally, which are really shaking things up and challenging the establishment.
And these divisions are making it even harder to find any sort of common ground.
Exactly. It's making it almost impossible to build consensus and move forward as a nation.
Speaking of Le Pen, you mentioned that her party holds a lot of influence in this fragmented parliament, even if they're not a majority.
Right.
What are her motives here? Is she simply trying to capitalize on this chaos, or is there a more strategic game at play?
Well, it's always difficult to know for sure what's going on in someone's head.
True.
But by deciding to support the no-confidence vote against Barnier, even after he offered concessions, she is sending a pretty clear message she's not interested in compromise.
So she's playing hardball.
Absolutely, and this could be a very calculated power play, a way to position herself and her party as the true alternative to the establishment parties.
So is she essentially betting on the failure of the current system?
You could say that if the government collapses and a new one can't be formed, it really reinforces this idea that the current system is broken, that it's beyond repair.
And that plays right into her narrative that she's the one who can fix France.
Exactly. It allows her to present herself as the solution, the savior, who can rescue France from this political chaos.
It's almost as if she's holding French democracy hostage to advance her own political ambitions.
Well, that might be a bit strong, but there's definitely an element of that in her actions. She's using this crisis as a platform to push her own agenda, and that agenda might not necessarily align with what's best for the country as a whole.
And the concerning thing is that this gamble could actually pay off for her. The article mentioned that new elections can't be held until July, which means France is stuck in this political limbo for months.
That's right. And the longer this uncertainty drags on, the more frustrated people are likely to become with the status quo. And that frustration could lead to even more extreme viewpoints taking hold, making it even harder to find a path back to stability.
So here we are, a government on the brink, deep divisions within society, and the people of France just waiting to see what happens next. What are some of the potential outcomes we could see unfold in the coming months?
Well, the immediate challenge is going to be finding someone to replace Barnier.
Right.
Someone to step into that prime minister role.
Right.
Macron's going to have to appoint someone, but finding someone who is both willing and able to navigate this incredibly difficult political landscape,
Yeah.
it's going to be a tough task.
It's a tall order.
Yeah. Whoever takes this on, they're going to need to be a master negotiator, someone who can build bridges and somehow find common ground in a parliament that right now feels very divided.
Yeah, it seems like consensus is a distant memory in French politics at this point.
It's definitely in short supply.
And even if they do manage to form a new government, it's not like all of these problems just disappear.
Oh, no, not at all. The underlying issues,
Right.
this fragmented parliament, the societal divisions, those economic challenges, that's all still there. Plus, any new government is going to be under immense pressure.
Oh, for sure.
They'll be walking a tightrope, trying to keep all these different factions in parliament happy, while also dealing with the fallout from this whole crisis.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Very tough.
The article also briefly mentions the possibility of Macron himself resigning. Is that a realistic scenario or just speculation at this point?
I think right now it seems unlikely. Macron's a pretty tenacious guy.
He is.
Yeah, he's a fighter, and resigning would be a huge admission of defeat. Plus, it would just throw France into even more turmoil.
Right.
It's hard to see him taking that step unless things get significantly worse and there's just no other way out.
So looking ahead, it seems like France is facing months of uncertainty.
Definitely.
Potentially a new government trying to find its footing, A lot of backroom deals and political maneuvering.
That sounds about right.
This BBC article really paints a somewhat bleak picture for the future of French politics.
It's definitely a challenging situation, but I wouldn't say it's entirely hopeless. Every crisis presents an opportunity.
This could be a chance for France to confront its political demons,
Yeah.
to really grapple with these issues.
Yeah.
Maybe this is what it takes for them to rethink their political system, find ways to bridge these divides, and create a stronger, more resilient democracy on the other side.
It's like that old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly. Sometimes you need to go through a difficult, painful process to come out stronger on the other side. And I think this could be a really defining moment for France.
And I think it also serves as a reminder for all of us, really, that democracy is fragile.
Oh, it is.
It needs to be nurtured, protected, and it's certainly not something that we can ever take for granted.
Well said.
This deep dive into the French political crisis has been, well, I'd say eye-opening is an understatement.
It has.
But as always, we appreciate you joining us as we break down these really complex issues.
It's always a pleasure. And for our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Do you think this crisis could be the catalyst for real and lasting change in France? Or is this just another chapter in their long and, let's be honest, somewhat tumultuous political history?
It's a great question.
We want to know what you think. So share your thoughts with us in the comments. Subscribe to the show so you don't miss any more of these deep dives.